Let's talk about the Mesh tool. We're here in the design portion of our palette, and when we first draw out a mesh, it behaves very similar to the slab tool. And we have the top and the bottom of the mesh. In its simplest form, let's just draw out a rectangle. Take a look at it in 3D. Now here's basically how we can modify a mesh in its simplest form. You select the mesh, you go back into the Mesh tool, and then you go about drawing any kind of geometry on top of the mesh you want. Now, that could be maybe a rotated rectangle. It could be regular rectangle, and I'm just clicking when this dialog box pops up. I'm just clicking OK over here, add new points, fit to user ridges. So we're adding new points to our mesh. So if I deselect the mesh and select the mesh again, notice all these points are now a part of this one mesh. Taking a look at 3D, we haven't really done anything. You know, you can see sort of some lines on there, but we haven't really affected the geometry in 3D. Now to affect the geometry in 3D, say we select the mesh and we click on any of these points, say this one here, and we go into this mode right here, which is right next to move node, but it's our Z height of that particular node, and it brings up this dialog box here. Now by default it's apply to all is unchecked. So if I say add a height of 8 feet to this one node here and click OK, it's going to make that one node there 8 feet high. So going into 3D, we're just going to have this weird thing where just one point is raised up to 8 feet. Now I'm going to undo that, and instead what is more common is if we select our mesh and say this guy right here, click on here, and then we add a height, say, of 6 feet and apply to all. That means that all the points on this rectangle here will be raised to a height of 6 feet. Notice in the middle we sort of have this valley here, and that's because these heights here have remained at 0. If we click on them, we can see the height is 0. We could also make them 6 feet high if we wanted to, and if we do that, then they are level with these points around it. Notice we don't have any points of tessellation, if you will, going out, because all these points are the same height. And that's always a good way of looking at a mesh. If you see points within points and there are no lines connecting them, then likely they're at the same height. So you can see if we orbit around here, we sort of have a tabletop mesa here. We raise these heights up something higher, say to 8 feet, then all of a sudden we get these tessellation points, and the ridge top is now higher at those points. Now what is more common, I guess you could say, let me delete this mesh out of here, is, or I should say, what is a more, renderable look to a mesh is if we choose some other geometry to add the mesh to. Maybe some property lines, something more organic, like, say, a spline or something. If we just draw this spline out, we don't have, of course, we don't have anything in 3D. Everything disappears. We can go back into the Mesh tool, up here in Design, Mesh. Hold down the space bar and magic wand, and you can see we now have that shape. And of course, we can be using whether it's circles or more splines, and we can draw these shapes out any way we want. Now try to stay inside the boundaries here. Delete back. Notice we don't have anything going on in 3D right now. But again, what we want to do is, our order of operation is to select the mesh, go back into the Mesh tool, hold down our magic wand and click on this geometry in here and add new points. Once we have our new points in there, we could select the mesh and go about clicking on one of them, applying to all, say an elevation of 5 feet, and another elevation of 5 feet. And yet, actually, let's make this higher. Let's go to 10 feet. This one here, we'll go to 15 feet. These inner ones here, we'll go to 20 feet. So that's the mesh tool used in conjunction with the magic wand and some other geometry to create a terrain. See, we got a smoother surface here. So that's the mesh tool in its simplest form. And I guess you could remember the rules as the following. You first create a mesh, then you select the mesh, go back into the mesh tool, and then draw more geometry to add points to that mesh. Now if you have some lines or splines on here, you can use the magic wand to add those points. And those points don't even have to be a closed shape. We could come right across here and add just 2 points in here and say add an elevation of 5 feet to both these points here. And so we end up with this kind of weird shape like this. So they don't have to necessarily be closed, and they can be just 2 points right in the middle of the mesh right here. So create a mesh, you select the mesh, then you add the points to the mesh.